We'll call the meeting to order. Ask for a roll call.
Belsley.
Here.
Blunier. Hare.
Here.
Lehman.
Here.
Newman.
Here.
Parrott. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're here tonight for this meeting with the intergovernment agreement for the 911, and I'll ask the police chief to give us an update.
Thank you, Your Honor. I've been talking to you for some time. I know that many of you are new to when I started talking about this on the board regarding the consolidation. To give you just a little bit of a recap, Governor Ronner signed legislation in June of 2015 requiring any counties with populations of less than 250,000 that they have to consolidate their PSAPs, which is a public safety answering point. That's the end point of where all 911 calls go to. And they have to reduce those by 50% or to 2 by June or July 1 of 2016. They had to have a plan in or a waiver submitted with consolidation done by July 1 of 2017. Our Tazewell County ETSB, Emergency Telephone Systems Board, filed a waiver with the 911 administrator and the 911 board by that July 2016 date. However, they denied our waiver to not have to participate in this and consolidate, but they did give us an extension date of submitting our plan by October 1st of this year, 2017, with the consolidation completion date by July 1 of 2019. We have completed our plan through the assistance of a consultant, a consolidation consultant. However, the 911 administrator and board refused to accept our plan because an integral part of that plan is intergovernmental agreements between the bodies of the Village of Morton, City of Washington, City of East Peoria, Pekin, the County of Tazewell, the Sheriff's Department, the City of Pekin, if I neglected to say them, and the Tazewell County's ETSB. This October 1st is a hard line date. Failure to submit the plan by that date can result in the ETSB not receiving any funding from the state. Part of this legislation took the oversight of the 911 systems from the Illinois Commerce Commission and gave it to the Illinois State Police, overseen by the 911 administrator and the 911 board. The ICC still has a portion. They are dealing with the vendors, AT&T, CenturyLink, Frontier, etc., getting the calls to the centers. With that in mind, they also have told us that they have the potential to be able to sue us in addition to not giving funding. Well, the failure of funding will not allow the ETSB to do any work to receive 911 calls. I don't think that the 911 administrator really wants to see that happen, but they're willing to play hardball. At this point, we've had the attorneys for all the governmental bodies for the county working on the intergovernmental agreement, which was in part of the consultant's final report. A month or better ago, I believe I gave each of you a copy of that final report that you've had with the ability to look through. But like I said, they've been working diligently to get this together and to prove. Last Tuesday evening, it went before the City Council of East Peoria. They require 2 readings. They approved it on the first reading. They have a formality this Thursday where they have to have a second reading, and that's going to be in the morning. Last Wednesday afternoon, the Tazewell County ETSB approved it. Last night, the City of Pekin approved it. The City of Washington approved it. It's before our board tonight. Tomorrow evening, it will be before the Tazewell County Board at their regular meeting, and then again, the final one is the City of East Peoria, which again, they've already actually approved it, but they require 2 readings. So that's where we are right now. The next step after this would be passed is all the communities have to form what's called a governance board, and then an operations committee. The governance board will oversee the financings and the operations of how it is being governed, with the operations board overseeing the policies, the procedures, and regulations of how it actually operates. In the intergovernmental agreement, it calls for the appointments of these the members on these board and committees, and the governance board is a membership of 11, with the operations board a membership of 13. That those are to be appointed by the various city councils or boards by a resolution and or ordinance. I think is how that puts. I would strongly urge this board to see about getting a resolution at the October 2nd meeting, if not no later than the October 17th, because even though we get the intergovernment agreements approved, we can't not go further until we get this governance board and the operations board. The governance board's first step will be seeking to appoint or hire a director to run the operations center, as well as get applications out for the dispatchers to house them and run the centers. The plan shows for all 4 of the present PSAPs, that be in Morton, East Peoria, Washington, and what's known as Tazewell Pekin Consolidated Communications Center, to decommission, with the formation of what's called the TC3, or Tazewell County Communications Center. The sooner that we get those boards in place, the sooner then they can get started, and that we have everyone in place to come in and operate once the transition goes. The plan is with the Morton Dispatch Center to move, once some remodeling work gets done at the Pekin site, which is the TPCCC, to move over there, and Washington to decommission and go over to East Peoria, and then the construction work on our facility to begin, and then everybody move into our facility, out of the East Peoria facility and into the Pekin facility. Our facility would be the TC3 North, with the Pekin facility being the TC3 South. Presently, the 4 PSAPs dispatch for 24 fire and EMS services and 19 police agencies. So this would be divided up amongst those 2 sites. With the whole purpose of having the 2 is to have redundancy, so that if anything happens to one site, that the other site will be able to pick up, move into there, and dispatch for the entire Tazewell County, hopefully not missing a beat. So I have hopes that this whole process will be seamless. I'm not sure that those are realistic hopes, but we hope to make this as seamless as we can. There is going to be a whole lot of changes for the citizens of East Peoria, Washington, and Morton on how their police departments operate. They're typically used to coming in there, and we're all a 24/7 operations, where our dispatchers are on duty within the centers, and they can see somebody whenever they come in. Our dispatchers answer 911 calls. They dispatch all the calls for service, as well as they handle walk-ins. And they are our records personnel. we are going to need to hire people to do the records for us, because these dispatchers will be much like they are presently at TPCCC. That's all they're going to be doing. They're going to be the call takers, the dispatchers, and handling those 911 calls as well as other calls. We, for the last 4 years, have averaged in Tazewell County just over 42,000 911 calls. But in addition to that, there's other calls for service. In 2016, we took a total of 193,000 calls in our county, so they stay pretty busy on that. We are at our station right now. I know Washington is doing the same thing. We are doing a daily and hourly count of how many people come into our station needing service, so that we can better gauge on how many personnel we're going to need to staff at the records window, and looking at how many hours a day and how many days a week we're going to want to do that. Outside of that, part of the plan is there's either going to be a telephone within the lobby area or a push button that will actually ring into the 911 portion center, and they would call an officer in to assist the personnel, much like is presently at the fire station. After hours, if they come in there, it rings into our 911 in case they need paramedics or anything when they're in there. I've given a lot of information, but my recommendation I would like to tell you is that for the governance board, I would recommend that you have a resolution naming me to sit on the governance board, and a resolution to name Sergeant Terry Smith and either Fire Chief Joe Kelly or someone or his designee to sit on the operations board. The operations board, they want somebody that is, according to the consultant, somebody that is on the ground working with the dispatchers, receiving calls from them. That would be somebody that isn't necessarily administrator for us, but somebody, one of my sergeants is, and I would recommend Sergeant Terry Smith for that, where the governance board is somebody that's dealing with some budgetary matters and the hiring process of that. So, any questions from any members of the board?
I'm going to have the council explain a few things, but if we can go ahead.
Well, do we want to move the motion?
Yeah, let's make a motion.
Motion to approve. Second.
Okay. Just so the citizens watching know, it's intergovernment agreement with City of Pekin, East Peoria, Washington, and Tazewell County, all moving into this facility. I thought I'd ask you for an overview of this. You knew what some of my concerns were.
Sure.
And then we'll open it up for questions.
So the intergovernmental agreement that's before you was prepared with input from the consultant and with feedback from all the involved attorneys. There are a lot of details that go into essentially creating a new governmental structure. I think the issue that I've heard the most concern about or had the most inquiries about from the village's standpoint is what is the village's financial commitment and what protections exist for that financial commitment. With regard to the operating cost on a year-to-year basis, the proposed new entity would operate under a model where agencies would pay a proportional share, with the proportion be based upon their call volume, which I found as your advocate to be a reasonable way to allocate the cost. We're not, compared to some of the other involved entities, the highest call volume agencies, and we wouldn't pay the highest share. Our share is approximately 10% of the call volume. And there's provisions for that to be adjusted. Probably the more important cost component of this is the cost to build out a structure to suit the new TC3 facility, the north facility, which would be housed at the village. And while we explored a couple different mechanisms to protect the village, what ultimately is before you is a provision that provides the village will be paid rent, either in a form of a cash payment or a set-off against our obligations to pay operational cost. The rent to be reasonable based on the space utilized, and there's a mechanism, if the parties can agree on reasonable rent, to bring in experts so that we have assurances at all times that the village is being paid fair compensation for the space leased. There was conversations about providing additional assurances that over the life of this arrangement, the village would be guaranteed to be repaid at least its initial investment, though resistance by other agencies involved, or a lack of, I shouldn't say resistance, but a lack of agreement due to the other agencies' concerns that at the end of the day, if this entity were to dissolve and the North PSAP were to close, the village would still be left with the space itself and would have the benefit to use that space. So based on the issues presented, I felt that the proposed intergovernmental agreement contains appropriate protections to ensure that the village receives a fair and adequate return on the investment it's going to make in building out a facility to house the North PSAP. So those are the two key financial issues. The remainder is a lot of details on bylaws and structure of this new entity, all of which I believe to be fair and reasonable, consistent with the consultant's recommendation, and consistent with the best interests of the village.
And how long is this agreement?
The agreement lasts for, I have to find
Is it 2030? Does that sound right?
Yes, May 1, 2030, and then it provides auto renewal for a period of kind of rolling 5-year periods.
Okay. Any questions from the board?
Well, in regards to the rent, I guess the way I read it is that would be initially decided by the governance board, would have the input on setting that or negotiating that, I guess. And then if they failed to negotiate, then there's the provision to engage in appraisers, and so that's the way that would work. They would there would be a negotiation first.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
And the intent of allowing the parties to negotiate directly is to save the cost of the experts unless we absolutely need to bring them in.
So the staff has some idea what fair rent would be
I
based
would be
on construction
working with
costs.
both our legal counsel and our administrator to look at what we believe to be a fair rent to bring up to the governance board.
And I would anticipate also the possible utilization of real estate professionals who may or may not be licensed appraisers, but who would be intimately familiar with the rental market in Morton, who could also serve in an advisory capacity to the village in those negotiations.
I think it's probably fair to say we're not trying to make money, but we're also trying to be fair to the taxpayer and and not lose money either. We need to come.
Right, we got to build a new addition with bulletproof glass, everything up to today's standards. We can't have below market rent. Won't pay for that.
Right.
Excuse me.
No, go ahead. Keep going.
Are we looking at about $800,000 there?
Well, it's probably closer to 9. The reason is the initial cost for the entire building by the architect was like $814, but the consultant said that we would probably need to add about an additional 50 onto that because all the south side, that facing Birchwood, all those windows are required to be bulletproof glass. Those and there are several that are not at this time on that side. Those that would be on the dispatch side. There's also some concerns about some barriers, such as some of the concrete posts, which help prevent someone from driving into the facility with vehicles. There is also, and this is probably a little bit later, but as you know, that where the old police station was located and where the fire is still housed, we have to be out of that at a certain point in time. All the base radios are located at that facility, and those base radios have to move out of there. Craig Laudermilk and I have had discussions with Reagan Communication as well as AT&T regarding the monopole over here by our water tower. They presently rent that space from the village, and they're looking at some avenues to try to lessen their rent cost. We have had discussion with them about moving antennas from the tower that is behind the water treatment plant there off of Jefferson and in that little alleyway between where the fire station is. All the antennas are located on that at that point. Right now, we would be looking at having the antennas up there, having wires come down. These radios would be needed to be housed in some kind of a building that would be need to be climate controlled for a prefab building like 10 by 10 by 30 that would be climate controlled. It's about $30,000 with other site work of about another $20,000 for that. That's according to some figures that I've got from our Public Works Director. So we're looking about another 50 there. So about I'm going to estimate total about 900,000. We're ballpark looking for everything, but that would be down the road.
That's design and construction?
Yes, at this point,
And
that's
no
where
equipment, though? Does that
No.
not include equipment?
No, the
Okay.
equipment cost is not all included in that. Now, a lot of the equipment that we've got is, and when I call it equipment, we call it furniture, the console
Definitely.
furniture.
Yeah.
We already have that. And in the intergovernmental agreement, what Morton owns or what Washington owns or what East Peoria owns will all go to the TC3. So we won't be looking at making any initial cost to purchase any of this equipment. We'll utilize that. Down the road, there is other radio equipment that'll have to be obtained for that console. Part of this legislation is down the end road of going from what we have now as enhanced 911 to NG 911 or next generation 911. Originally, we started with 911 back in the 60s, but we got it here in the 80s when they formed the ETSB back in 9/11 of 91. All of Tazewell County was basic 911, and all that meant is we were able to see a phone number that came from. By late 93 or February of 93, we transitioned into our goal at that point of going enhanced 911. That gives us a location as well as a phone number. We are working under legacy technology in the police stations, which means we have old equipment. You all have new cell phones, new phone stuff that we can't move into from digital to the analog. So what we hope to do with this is, and the goal right now is a present goal date of July 1 of 2020, that this NG 911 may have to be implemented by. That'll be all new phone systems. It's not sure how that's going to be paid for. There's thought that AT&T may be purchasing some of this, so that will be a cost that we don't have, which is also, we believe, part of the reason of the consolidation. They have to purchase less. But if they do that, then that means we don't have to get that phone equipment. And there's two phases to the NG 911. The first phase is to go from to the digital to allow photo and text to be sent, and with the end run being a IP portion, that it would allow for video to be sent. So
Because there's really no, I mean, down the road, there's not going to be a phone, it'll just be a right, it's a computer-based system where
that's down the road, the EZNet, which is a emergency services IP, and we've seen the transition go. Like I said, we saw the landline. We started going in the 90s. We saw some voice over IP with where you could do stuff over your computer, and
Right,
then we
'cause
saw the wireless.
Yeah, because like the phone centers that I see now mostly don't, like they don't have phones like what we think of. It's all run through the computers. And then that was going to be my question for you, is that obviously you're going to have computers and software system. And I know, we're not worried about that, but that'd be something to think about, as to
That's
Who
something
own-
down the road as this
Yeah.
transitions.
Who
that-
owns that, and then how does that get rented out? Where does the money come from, et cetera, so.
Well, right now, in the monies for all our 911 stuff comes through the ETSB. It comes from surcharges on your phones. Even the people that do the prepaid phone, there's about a 3% surcharge that they have to pay on that. There's a surcharge on your wireless. And that recently increased on the legislation from 87 cents a phone to $1.50. But when it transitioned from the ICC to the ISP, overseeing this, the monies no longer come straight to the ETSB. They go to the state police. They pay a lot of the phones bills and stuff, and then they send us the remainder. So the ETSB gets approximately $1.2 million a year that goes into the 911 services for everybody. So that's sort of how that works. But again, we've seen the transition. We just can't go from analog to digital right now because of our legacy equipment. But that's sort of the phases to go through, and we're seeing this nationwide. With this transition down in the southern part of the state, there's a group they've already went to go to NG 911, and it's in operations at various parts of the country. But this is sort of the end run where we're looking for this as a goal. So there may be some additional costs there, but
Those costs, though, there's some of those costs will be paid by TC3 ultimately.
yes, some of those by TC3, some of this by the ETSB, and we may see down the road that TC3 becomes the ETSB. We're mandated right now by statute to have a telephone systems board in the county, but once this gets on the road, you may see a transition that they morph together.
Right. But those costs will be recovered through the service charge. I don't know whether that's the appropriate term, but basically what we pay for that service based on the funding formula and whatnot. But there will be down the road, I assume, some costs that the village will have to pay directly, as will all municipalities and entities, in upgrading radio equipment and
That's
whatnot.
correct, and I see that cost going into the TC3.
That also going in.
Well, that's what I see at this
Okay.
point, that cost will go into the TC3, and the TC3 will oversee getting the equipment that they need to operate. But there may be increased costs for each body to put to that. Pat?
And there's also another issue, isn't there, Chief? At least some conversation about changing the band, and maybe the banding's the wrong word, but changing the radios, which may relate to what Ken's speaking
Right.
to as well.
Well, and there's going to be radio costs, and that can be quite an expensive cost. We know that Peoria County just went to a complete radio system, new radio system for their county. It cost $16 million plus a tower to do that. Our county doesn't have that kind of money. Our ETSB doesn't have that kind of money. I think their ETSB paid not half, but close to that, and other grants that they got to do that. We know that the Tazewell County and the county bodies and Pekin, the Tazewell County is working under a 800 megahertz frequency, and that is nearing the end of life. And the 800 megahertz was brought in initially as for data, to do data, not for voice, but it's been used for voice, and they've had a lot of issues with that, and that's going to go by the wayside. The rest of us the police agencies, we're all under a 400 megahertz, but we all have different frequencies. The initial thing here is, at least for the first 2 to 5 years, work under the frequencies that we have now and be able to cut over and connect one to the other, but eventually go into something different where all the in the county there are 30 frequencies designated for Tazewell County under 700 megahertz, and we would look to probably utilize 3 of those for the radios. The fire's a little bit different where they're at, but still you're talking 24 agencies with 24 different frequencies right now, and they would have to do something to pull those a little bit together so that they would be a more compatible. But that is always a nightmare anytime anything, emergency situation happens, is the compatibility of the radios and frequencies.
Ultimately, I would think, long-term, that this would improve that service and that communication between various agencies in the county.
I believe down the road, it'll improve that. If we do NG 911, once that gets, that has its own improvements, officer safety. I mean, you're talking to people being places, being able to send video of something that's actually happening, and that being able to be sent to the officer on the car, and he can actually see what's going on as he's responding. Plus, the hearing impaired, the deaf, being able to not have to get special equipment to contact, but be able to just use their phones that they've got. So there's a lot of officer safety issues there, and public safety issues that will be addressed by the NG 911. The radio communications, the improvement there. You're talking about the consolidating the dispatch centers. Now you have one big group to be able to pull from, to be able to call in if you need assistance. People have benefit time off, so you're looking at one big group to be able to call for instead of the smaller groups. All the dispatch centers, one of the things that they will all tell you is that they're understaffed as far as the number of personnel that they have, and so the dispatchers have to work volumes of overtime, which is hard on them. And then that, again, it's a safety issue for them, and in turn, it's a safety issue for the officers that they're dispatching for. So we see improvement there as well out of this.
But isn't it correct, Chief, that the estimated amount that it will cost us initially, not including any additional amount for equipment, is less than what we are currently estimating our budget, our operating cost of our dispatch center is, so.
Yeah, we're looking to go hopefully a decrease in what our overall expenditure is to operate this.
The
right
operating
now.
costs.
Right.
I said my largest operating cost is salary, so that's 86% of my budget.
The addition we're talking about is 30 foot.
It's 25 foot by 110 foot.
And that would be this side of the fire station toward the Freedom Hall.
It would put us 12 foot from the property line between the Freedom Hall and us.
And when we built the police station, we provided that area for a future expansion. We just didn't know when.
Yeah, that is one of the ideal things, is that this east wall of the police station was built as a knockout wall, so with the potential future expansion. So we just didn't realize it might be this near to the future of it being built, which is again an advantageous thing for us, that it is that much newer of a building to be able to do this. The ideal things with ours is we've got a generator which is able to handle the addition. We've got an equipment room, and we're the only one of the facilities that can expand, and we're the only one of the facilities that has an equipment room big enough to be able to handle all the added dispatch equipment.
And advantages too, if the group decided to buy an old building and remodel it because it had big square foot, we might actually be looking at bigger costs than adding on to a new building up to today's standards. So I think the Morton citizens will benefit. Now, out of that $800,000, $900,000 number, only about 500 is actually toward this, correct?
Yes. The additional is addition to some space that we have and move. We would be looking to add a new, I'll just call it a car garage type storage area that we would be able to secure vehicles in, that we would impound for evidentiary purposes. We could be able to secure them until we had crime process teams come in to process them, as well as to store them. Right now, we store them in a facility that is shared with other departments with the village, which isn't ideal. But we would also expand a little storage area in the investigations. So, I mean, it's been 13 years, but we've filled some space over there, and it would allow for some of the storage there as well.
So they're gonna be looking at that whole length addition one time, but some of that is actually for us. So this board would be having to pay for we're wanting them to pay over a period of time, that $500,000 approximately.
Right, that would all be
Right.
taken into account and determine what the fair rent is for the facility. Is budget-wise, help me out, I haven't studied the budget real well, but is all the costs in this year, or how did you break that out?
We only put in 200,000 because we're anticipating probably mostly just engineering costs and design costs to be paid in this current fiscal year, because it runs through April of 18, and we're anticipating construction to begin much before that if it does. So we did put in 200,000 so we could pay for engineering and that type of thing.
The general fund doesn't have an extra $500,000 to pay for this in cash, so more than likely we're
I didn't
gonna.
think the general fund had enough money in it.
So I'm sure we'll have to just borrow the money, take the rent check and make the payment.
Yeah.
So I've asked,
Do you anticipate that will be necessary? That we will have to finance?
It would be better than to pull all that money out of the general fund, all in one swipe.
so I've asked her to look into the financing and she'll get those ideas, and then as we see the budget going, we'll decide if we are or how we're gonna do that.
Right now, the utility service calls that come in after hours come through dispatch, and that's not unusual for the other communities to have that as well. The difference is we're our own natural gas provider, and the other communities, I think, are all with Ameren on there.
I know East Peoria is with Ameren. Not sure about all the
Yeah.
communities. I know that this is a concern that I've spoken
Yeah.
with both
Can
Craig
you-
Laudermilk and Scott Stidman on, and that it's a issue that we will be addressing on how those calls come in.
I mean, because right
actually-
now, the gas department provides training to dispatch even for that, and helps us out in that area. Now, that's not to say that it can't correlate with Ameren or some other gas provider too to work that through, but those are just some of the things, when you mentioned that our citizens may experience some change with this, that's maybe one of the areas that we'll have to work through, and I'm assuming this operations committee is going to get down to the nitty-gritty of that, but it's just something that we need to be aware of, as we work through the details of this too down the road.
Well, currently, when a citizen calls the village office after 5 o'clock, it rolls automatically over to the dispatch center. Craig Loudermilk and Scott Stidman have looked into checking into a service that we could have. The cost is, I was surprised, not very expensive at all, that those calls would automatically roll to this service that would dispatch directly to our on-call people for gas calls or water calls that are emergencies. The only thing that would be the concern if we were to do that, that would remain, is if someone calls 911 on a gas emergency or any other kind of a sinkhole or something in their yard or something along that line, educating the dispatchers for those types of calls. But otherwise, one of the big pieces of that would be eliminated if we were to have the after-hour calls that come into the village roll over to this service rather than to dispatch. So.
But I would guess all the answering points currently receive calls like that,
They would all receive, it's just who they notify.
Yeah.
That's the
yeah, and
concern.
they all have procedures, I imagine, for who they're to notify.
Right.
But the difficulty is, you can drive down, say if you drive out to Oaklawn Trailer Park, you can, like my mother, where she lives is Morton Gas, the gal next to her is Ameren. You know, for a dispatcher in Pekin or Morton that's not from this area to be able to identify, oh, I gotta dispatch this to the Morton guys, or I've gotta call Ameren on an emergency call. That's the concern, is that they'll knee-jerk reaction, I'm gonna call Ameren, and it takes 15, 20 minutes for Ameren to figure out that it's not theirs, it's ours, and there's a delay in
But that exists
response.
now also.
Correct.
A lot of that's done through the mapping and information that's
Yeah.
in the CAD system, so it lets them know which bodies, whether it's a sheriff's department, because we do have some places that would be within town that it's the sheriff's department covers, or that it's the Morton Police, or some of the outlying areas, whether it's Morton Fire Department or someone else gets those calls. So a lot of that protocol is done within the CAD system and how it's entered.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
I mean, to me, the big issue is the rent. You know, just making sure that it's fair, equitable, and, you know, again, I don't
That
think
was
we expect to make
administration's, and that's why
money off this,
our
but,
council worked hard to get
yeah.
in there, so we can document what it's really worth. We want to be fair, like Mr. Hare said, but we have to pay the bills.
Yep.
If not, call roll.
Yeah, before he falls out of his chair.
On that note, Hare.
Yes.
Lehman.
Yes.
Newman.
Yes.
Belsley.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We need to have a closed session for the pursuit to 5 ILCS 120-2C1 to discuss the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employee of the village. And I would ask a motion for that, please.
So moved.
Second.
Call the roll.
Lehman.
Yes.
Hare.
Yes.
Newman.
Yes.
Belsley.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you.